My name is Matthew Jordan. I'm a member of we're the Cochran family. We're in New York City on Fifth Avenue. Yeah, so we've got the family together here for Christmas. Yeah, so actually last time I saw you, Harold, was last year. Last year the bike tour I did from northern, Plattsburgh, so sort of a little slightly more northern New York to sort of central New York, Albany. It was like a 4-day ride, I think, and but it wasn't so much distance, and there was a lot of great infrastructure, so there wasn't, in terms of ride security, it was a really great ride. It was Nikki's house, and it was a very warm welcome, and we had a lovely dinner, and it was a great sort of mini family reunion. It was last May, 2017. So I live in Mozambique, which is in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a really interesting country. Anything sort of below the Zambezi River is really interesting ecologically and culturally, and from my perspective, working in kind of conservation development, it's a really interesting place that has a lot of potential. So in the next 50, 100 years, you'll see kind of that part of Africa go from kind of being this kind of resource source for many developed countries to being developed countries to kind of heading into a class of their own and being sort of modern economies. And we're kind of trying to build towards that future, but at the same time acknowledging that if something's not done for protected areas, they'll just go away. So that's sort of my work. And originally, I never wanted to go to Africa. I was actually kind of afraid of Africa. I was afraid of malaria. I was afraid of this kind of big continent where I knew nothing about. I'd had traveled to Latin America before, and I traveled to Asia before as a researcher and as a sort of an engineer. And I decided to kind of do something that I'd always wanted to do, which was join the Peace Corps. And I signed up for the Peace Corps. I was living in San Francisco at the time. And I went to my recruiter's office and I said, I will go anywhere except Africa, and I will do anything except teaching. And about 3 months later, I got a letter in the mail, and it says, you've been selected for a program in Mozambique, and you're going to be a teacher. And so I thought the call to service trumped my own kind of preconceived ideas of where I think I should be. And that was about six years ago. When I sort of set foot in Mozambique. Well, so after I joined the Peace Corps, I spent 2 years in a village as a high school teacher in physics and chemistry. And it kind of gave me, one could say, kind of a capacity that was a little bit unique. So it kind of put me in a bit of a niche market in terms of my employability. So when I finished Peace Corps, I was looking for a job where I could use some of those skills. So I learned Portuguese. I learned a lot about this kind of cross-cultural management, sort of cross-cultural conflict resolution. And then I also knew a bit about sort of capacity building in the developing world. So there was this sort of set of skills that I wanted to put to use because my impact in the Peace Corps was really minimal. It's a very sort of grassroots organization. So then I applied for a position with the Gorongosa project, which is in central Mozambique, and it's an NGO that is part national park, part development agency, part NGO, and sort of part for-profit. And I started working there about 4 years ago, and since I began, I started off as a program manager for science education, and I sort of gradually entered in this role of working for sustainable livelihoods, and then it sort of lent itself into more work in reforestation and then finally into coffee production. So my current work now is spearheaded by a coffee and reforestation project on Mount Gorongosa, again, which is in central Sofala, central Mozambique in sub-Saharan Africa. And we're looking at a large-scale, long-term coffee reforestation and alternative livelihoods approach, kind of trying to encapsulate the best of two worlds, which is the social impact world. So we do development work. We work with schools. We work with health clinics. We work with sort of extension services and agriculture, work with governments. And then there's the for-profit approach. So that's the commercialization of the coffee itself, and trying to get these smallholder farmer, someone who has like less than a couple acres of land. And the idea is that we're trying to link those people to the sort of global commodities trade, to kind of leverage their story to get a premium price in the world market. And that premium price then translates back to their own sort of improved household incomes and improved kind of sustainable livelihoods. Yeah, well, coffee is a rainforest tree, so it's it depends on who you ask. Someone would say it's a tree, someone would say it's a bush, someone would say it's a shrub. But it's a rainforest tree, so it really likes to live underneath the canopy, kind of a semi-closed canopy forest. So the history of the coffee project in that particular area is a bit interesting, only because we came in about 5 years ago with an idea that we would just do reforestation. And what we found very quickly was that you try to tell people to quit growing food and start growing trees that they can't eat, they'll quickly tell you to get off their mountain and to stop interfering with their lives. And that's exactly what happened. So then the second approach was, why can't we do both? Why can't we provide some alternative like coffee and something to sort of that brings generates some household income, but at the same time it provides this reforestation component. So every time you plant a coffee tree, better say, every time you plant a row of coffee trees, you plant 9 native coffee trees with 9 native species, and that could be Newtonia, it could be different acacias, and these sort of African hardwoods. Some of them grow up quickly, they start to provide tree cover, which then the coffee really likes, so the quality improves, then they get a better price. So we've kind of tried to create this link between what one could call ecosystem services, which would be the sort of ecosystem services provided by the hardwood trees, the water availability, the soil nutrients, the soil stabilization, so reducing erosion, the biodiversity. So just for example, a small sort of anecdote, there's a small coffee pest. It's a little larvae that burrows into the stem. One of the ways to control for that pest, obviously you could spray, or if you have the kind of ecosystem service or the biodiversity reserve, which are these small parasitic wasps that then can consume and sort of eat these, I can't remember what they're called. There's yellow-headed boar is what they're called. So coffee in and of itself is not enough. When you look at trying to do conservation and trying to do human development, you have to think very holistically. These are what would be called kind of wicked complex problems. So the forces that are at play with the communities and with the natural environment, with the governance, everything is a bit mixed in there, and it's a bit of a web, a bit of a very complex web. And so if you try to improve one thing, you might find that that something else kind of gives as way, and you have some unintended consequences. Or you improve, for example, people's household income, but doesn't improve education, or doesn't improve their healthcare. And so I think the uniqueness of the model that's being championed in Gorongosa is the integrated approach, so that when we work with the community, we bring coffee. So that's where I sit. I sit in this. I bring coffee. We do extension services. We teach people about sort of financial literacy. We teach them to think about their farm as a small business. But on the other side, my colleagues bring in for example, girls' clubs. So they bring in this effort to try to keep girls in school. It's a huge threat to kind of their livelihoods, conservation, human development, because as girls don't go into school, they sort of a human rights question, like first and foremost, and it's also a population question. I think that there's just one very important thing to always remember is that when a girl stays in school, she ends up having agency to make choices, and the choice she always makes is to have fewer children.
I am Larissa Souza. I'm working at Gorongosa National Park for the program of girls' education. Our main aim is to keep girls in school, because for many reasons, as soon as girls are old enough, let's say 12, 13, they normally are sent to get married. Having early marriages, early pregnancies, and not having the girls go to school is something that is not good. We want to have them stay in school. We try to explain to these girls, as well as their parents, what is the importance of them getting an education and being able to cater for themselves in the future. Educating a woman is educating a society. We put together opportunities for these girls, things that they would never be able to get. In this way, opening doors for this child. In the beginning, you would greet the girls and they would run away. They are more open now to opportunities. They want to know more of life. What is there more? They're curious. It's very interesting how some of the girls already come and say, "Oh, I want to be a doctor. I want to be this," because now they see that this is possible. So that's what makes us work harder every day.
Olá, chamo-me Sara do pelo terceiro grupo da Barriga. Estou aqui no Parque Nacional da Gorongosa. Olá. Olá.
And so in that sense, it helps her family, helps her be able to put her kids through school. One very important thing to always remember is that when a girl stays in school, she ends up having agency to make choices, and the choice she always makes is to have fewer children. And so in that sense, it helps her family, helps her be able to put her kids through school. And so when I do coffee, the farmers, their young girls, for example, they get involved with these girls clubs, which are basically an after-school kind of literacy program and mentorship program and sort of reproductive health program. And at the same time, the young mothers work with my other colleagues in the health sector. And so the young mothers come down, they do vaccines for their children, they look at sort of nutrition, and there's a lot of, where we work, there's a lot of malnutrition. So there's a lot of children sort of affected by something called stunting, which means that they don't grow big and strong. They don't have the food, they don't have the nutrients. And so we try to teach young mothers about how you can basically ground up eggshells and put them in your breakfast, and then that's a source of protein, for example. And then on the other side, so there's me business, there's education, there's health, and then there's this governance component. So the best communities out there are those that are empowered to govern themselves and have agency to make their own choices. So it's sort of this democratization coming back to the community level. And we have people who work with something called the Community-Based Natural Resources Management Committee. And that committee is responsible for the use of their natural resources. So instead of, for example, them coming down and cutting down 5 hectares of indigenous rainforest and then planting maize for 1 or 2 years, they can now sort of understand the ecosystem services that small patch of rainforest provides. Water, soil erosion, biodiversity for integrated pest management, and then they can kind of leverage that to find the right crops that fit for their circumstances, for example, or do something that's totally integrated, like honey, for example, or maybe the strongest component is when people kind of internalize the message of conservation and importance of nature. So, in the United States, for example, if you were to look at 40 years ago, no one would recycle because no one would do anything about pollution either. I mean, you would go to cities and they would just be, you couldn't breathe. They were like Beijing. But then somebody said that our children are getting asthma, that you can't see, that you don't want to go outside on a hot day. And then we're in that same business in Mozambique. We're in the business of kind of sort of this, there's a great term from this book called Nudge by Cass Sunstein. So it's a term of paternal liberalism. So kind of helping people have choice and agency, but directing that choice and agency to choices that really improve their lives. So for example, when we write contracts for our smallholder farmers, they can either opt in or opt out of a savings program. And it turns out if they're already opted in and they have to opt out, they're going to save more, and they're going to send their kids to school, they're going to save it for motorbikes, they're going to save it for solar panels. If it's an opt-in, they won't do it and they'll just drink the money away. So they still have agency, but kind of we think of ourselves much more as sort of choice architects, in that we craft the choices so that the easiest and most helpful choice is the first choice that people make. So this concept of being a choice architect. So how am I a choice architect in the work I do in Gorongosa? When we sign contracts with people who are growing coffee, for example, we present them with a lot of choices. And if you have a basic understanding of behavioral economics, which is a lot of what marketers use, except marketers use it to maximize their profit, you can use that same thinking to maximize your impact on people's lives. And I think about it as in my own decision, in my own life, that I would much rather somebody sign me up to be an organ donor than me have to remember to sign them to be an organ donor. Because it's something I want to do anyway, but I find that the choice is a bit difficult to make sometimes, or I'm busy, or I'm lazy, or whatever else. And we, in our role in Gorongosa, we are often presented with those type of choice options that we present to people. And I think that having that deep understanding of a little bit about how humans think and the psychology of people helps us to present choices that really provide the best possible outcome for the people we're working with. And I think that ultimately that's kind of where we all should be, or we all want to be, is having sort of having our organizations, our companies that we work for, thinking of our best interests. And I think that that's one of the most impressive things about the work with coffee, is that it's a social impact model. So you think of things now in the business world, many people are converging on this concept of a triple bottom line, or they're converging on this concept of people, planet, and profit, so that you have to try to make your quarterly returns. It's really important. So we have to try to make a financially sustainable product and service, but at the same time, we don't want to sacrifice or externalize some of these human or environmental costs that exist and are inherent in any of the work we do. And I think that it's not just this type of small business in Africa that's doing this. It's very big businesses, it's corporations around the world, it's governments thinking like this. And I think that our model, the biggest difference is the integration across different services, for-profit, human development, education, conservation. But one could imagine that you could take any of those pieces and use these same kind of elements and to have a really big impact on people's lives. So what is in the future for me or for our coffee project, and where are we going? We're at the starting point. We've really done a lot of, the last 5 years has really been proof of concept. I think we've had proof of concept through a 3-4 year piloting project. We've had proof of concept of our own resilience. So the resilience from perseverance through a very intense conflict, a drought, a plague, and then an economic crisis all happening in the country where we're operating. And we're taking all that learning and sort of accumulated knowledge and we're taking it into this global market. And we're trying to say that what we have here is a high quality, amazing story, and we want to bring that to people. And one of the ways that we're doing that now is we've started a company here in the US, we've started a company in Mozambique that work towards this goal of a social impact business, so that the profits that are made go back into the stakeholders and not only this sort of shareholder model. And so it's a really powerful program. And my role now is I've been put in charge of this effort. And so me and a whole army of people all working together are trying to make this come to fruition. And one of the most interesting pieces might be the storytelling component. So it's interesting being interviewed because now that I'm in a kind of a leadership role is that it'll be my job to be the talking head and to be the person who's telling the story for all of the people who are doing the work. And so when I'm not there, I'll be sort of traveling around and doing some speeches and doing some lectures and sort of trying to carry the message of this program. And one of the big ways I'm going to be doing that is with a National Geographic Fellowship. So Gorongosa has been selected amongst about 3 places in the entire world that are part of National Geographic's Last Wild Places. It's a new initiative that is just launching in 2019. And as part of that, there's a few of us fellows who've been selected to kind of carry this message of the work we're doing in conservation. Right now, I have to find a way to kind of take that message and that experience and translate it to an audience who maybe has never been to Mozambique, maybe who doesn't really understand everything about the nuances of development or the difficulties with coffee or the real story of why we're thinking on a 25-50 year time scale in our approach. And I have to kind of make that story very real for people. And I think the best way to do that is just kind of tell real facts about things that are happening on a very personal level. And so that's my mission in 2019 to speak in D.C. So I'll be speaking in D.C. in June and in May, one for National Geographic Nights and one for a Fellows Symposium. And then I think there'll be 1 or 2 more opportunities where I have to speak. So the general media of the park is also doing a big campaign to promote this model of integrated development, mixing social impact and mixing for-profit and conservation. And part of the ways we're doing that is with National Geographic. There's a new story coming out. There's new films in the works. So there was just a ranger film. Now there's a film called, the working titles are Gorongosa. And it's about the women working within Gorongosa in the medical field, education, the science field, human-animal conflict. So there's another film coming out there. Then there's a CBS 60 Minutes special coming out. And all this is kind of helping to create that sort of popular, bringing on the, raising awareness of people that this is a story that's happening in the world.